We all know how much Facebook sucks from both an ethical and doom-scrolling user interface lens these days, so I'm rarely on it anymore. I usually log in about once a month to hawk our YouTube videos to our Facebook friends, and then I log off. But a few months ago, I was looking for a picture to share with someone, one that I knew I had posted on Facebook years ago, so I was scrolling through to find it, when I saw an advertisement. It caught my eye right away, because honestly, it looked like I was being advertised Proud Boy stuff. Between the American flags, the Roman laurel, and the manly man masculinity dudes who look so serious. I thought I was seeing some alt-right conference just casually advertised on my feed. Like the sucker I am, I knew I had to look into it. And boy howdy did we find something. We fell down a rabbit hole, discovering a whole network of culty, scammy, masculine, manly man groups dedicated to muscles, capitalism, and Sigma grindset, baby. Hi, I'm Dan.
And I'm Jake, and we're both public high school teachers. There's this cottage industry selling guys the promise that they will become more manly and more dominating, promising personal excellence in all areas of life. They're aimed specifically at men. There are a few women who you'll see here and there, but I would estimate that the guests, the memberships, and the leaders of these brotherhoods are 99% male. I mean, they call themselves brotherhoods. Looking at their memberships, those groups are almost entirely white and are completely focused on straight Christian dudes. The one that we're going to be focusing on is called the Arete Syndicate. There are a few others out there, like the Iron Council, but they seem mostly based around podcasts and are in general a lot smaller, so we'll only mention them here and there. The Arete Syndicate is a sort of club for bro-y business guys that you have to pay a lot of money to join. But it's also much more than that. The Arete Syndicate is headed by Andy Frisella and Ed Milet, both of whom are businessmen who have parlayed their success into becoming motivational speaker types. And to understand Arete, you have to understand these two.
Before we get really into it, I want to be clear that we're not going to be very nice to the founders of these programs because they really suck. But I don't want to be misunderstood. If you're the type of person who finds these guys admirable or has bought a program like this, you're not really the bad guy here. We'll get to more of that later, but the guys we want to focus on are the con artists, not the people who've been conned.
We're going to start with the big fish, Andy Frisella. Andy is the co-founder of the Arete Syndicate, as well as the host of a couple of podcasts, including Real AF with Andy Frisella and MFCEO. He's also the CEO of a supplements company called First Form, as well as a few others. It's actually pretty hard to tell what Andy's real story is, because almost everything about him is written like an advertisement for either his business or for himself. And the funny thing is, everything kind of is an ad. Andy's website lists that he was featured in Forbes magazine. So I checked out the article on the Forbes website. And yeah, he was featured in Forbes, but the article was written by Brian Rashid, not a journalist, but a brand strategist whose firm, Brian Rashid Global, helps you brand yourself and tell your story. So, you know, it's a planted paid advertisement. These days, Andy seems like mostly an inexpensive speaker and author and just general evangelist of his story, because as you're going to see repeatedly throughout this video, he's made a lot of money. And that means he's got everything figured out. That means he's better than you.
Andy is also an alt-right conspiracy theorist, the worst kind of domineering podcast host, and a complete grifter. Episode 384 of his podcast, Real AF, is a pretty standard episode of his podcast and does a good job of illustrating what kind of guy Andy is and what he's selling to his audience. If you look at the cover, he's got that classic, "I'm telling truth so real society can't even handle me" kind of message with his duct-taped mouth. Just a few minutes into the podcast, Andy brags about how he's lost count of how many Ferraris he owns, which is like totally cool, and something I definitely believe him about. I almost feel bad for his co-host DJ, because there's a 27-minute stretch where Andy will barely let the guy finish a single sentence, even though he's mostly just globbing on to agree with Andy. We counted it, 27 solid minutes where Andy cuts the guy off every time.
So, what is the real AF truth that society doesn't want Andy to say? Well, in this episode, it's mostly that PEDO files. You know, this video will probably get buried by YouTube if we say that word a lot, so we'll just call them Michael Scotts.
I, Michael Scott, am signing up with an online dating service. I need a username, and I have a great one. Little Kid Lover. That way people will know exactly where my priorities are at.
Sorry. So his secret truth is that Michael Scotts are bad. That if you're a Michael Scott,
Little Kid Lover.
that's horrible. What an icon, Andy, because we agree with you. Andy continually acts like this is a controversial stance and that someday soon the normal, common sense people of the world will rise up against the Michael Scotts of the world. But here's the thing. Andy isn't truly raging against Michael Scotts. He's playing some equivocation game here. Andy's responding to a news story about a statement given by Spain's Minister of Equality. According to Andy, the Spanish minister said that children have a right to consent to any experience, regardless of age or family, including those initiated by a Michael Scott.
Little Kid Lover.
So it's only about 10 minutes into the podcast where Andy starts freaking out about the state of the world and the alleged hordes of Michael Scotts in power. But what he's actually referring to is Democrats. He equates the left's and Democrats' acceptance and advocacy of LGBT rights as pushing for the rights of Michael Scotts.
Little Kid Lover.
So what Andy is really saying is that Democrats and queer people are Michael Scotts.
Little Kid Lover.
Or at the very least, Michael Scott enablers, and we have to do something about this. You fucking crazy fucks don't rule the world, dude. I know you think you do, because for the last 10 years, people have taken your shit inch by inch by inch by inch, but I can promise you, the line is drawn with this Michael Scott shit, and anybody advocating it will be fucking dealt with. He refers a lot, all the time in this episode, to how there will be executions, immediate executions. They will string you up in the town square. But here's the thing. That's not what that Spanish minister even said.
Andy is completely, and I mean totally, mischaracterizing the story to fit his narrative and justify violence against the left. The speech given by the Spanish minister said the opposite of what Andy thinks it did. It wasn't pro-Michael Scotts. According to the Associated Press, Irene Montero, Spain's Minister of Equality, did not suggest this when she spoke before a legislative commission last week. The left-wing politician was discussing provisions in a proposed abortion law that deals with sex education programs, including material about consent. But to talk about sex education, for example, which is a right of boys and girls regardless of who their families are, Montero said in Spanish, every boy, every girl, every trans child in this country has the right to know their own body, to know that no adult can touch their body if they don't want them to, and that if they do that, then that is a form of violence. No adult can touch a child without their consent, and if they do, that's a form of violence. The statement is pro-sex education and anti-Michael Scott. The most pathetic part about this episode of his podcast is that Andy eventually goes on this self-pity rant, screaming at his listeners for not supporting him enough because he's been saying this for years and they haven't done anything about it. You know, real alpha stuff.
It was actually really tough researching this video because I listened to hours of Andy's miserable podcast and watched a bunch of his videos, and my ring light's not on. Before we move on to the other guys here, I want to go over one last thing. Andy's the CEO of the supplement company, First Form. Supplements and, in general, the wellness industry are already on pretty dubious scientific ground, so I was already skeptical about the company. But about 5 seconds of research shows that they're a multi-level marketing business, also known as an MLM, a well-known scam. Fun way to earn an additional income and free products. Our Legionnaire program shows you how to get paid for doing what you love. You get to present a wide range of high-quality products and apparel that your followers, family, friends, and clients are already looking for. Apply to join the program today and enjoy earning an income. Yeah, their Legionnaire program is just a pyramid scheme. You have to spend a lot of money to be able to sell. Some users on the anti-MLM subreddit did some digging, finding out that you first have to be a customer, meaning you have to buy in before you can sell. They show up on the Anti-MLM Coalition's master list of pyramid schemes in the very first slot. I know that's just because their name starts with a 1, but it still felt appropriate. They're a scam. Just keep that in mind for later.
In comparison to Andy Frisella, the other Arete Syndicate founder, Ed Mylett, is almost palatable. Large sections of Ed Mylett's output are more in the vein of a traditional motivational speaker. He has a podcast where he talks to people who have done amazing things, like this Colin O'Brady guy who's climbed the highest mountain on every continent and walked across the Arctic. Ed actually does seem to engage with people who have positive things to say, like when Colin O'Brady says that it's okay to be uncomfortable, and that's where growth happens. I totally wholeheartedly agree with that. There's some business types, athletes, actors. His show is sometimes explicitly Christian, and he'll talk to people about finding strength in their faith, like here with Leanne Rimes. And is that Dane Cook? Dane Cook, the 50-year-old who's engaged to a woman who's 23 and started dating her when she was literally just 18, and he had known her for years prior to that? What was that whole thing about Michael Scott's?
Little kid lover.
Outside of the innocuous stuff about motivation, though, Ed can skew pretty hard into the Sigma grind set stuff, peddling some truly inane advice. Here he is on a talk show discussing, I don't know, what do we want to call it? The structure of his schedule? Metaphysics?
You do not believe in a 24-hour day.
You know, it's the dumbest thing in the world that we still measure time like we did 100 years ago. My days are 6 hours. 6 hours from 6 a.m. to noon. That's a day. And in that day, you get the most love, fun, business, money, whatever you want. Second day, noon to 6 p.m. Same thing. That's another day. I get 21 days a week.
Okay.
You stack that up over a year, I'm going to kick your butt in business in life.
What does that mean, Ed? What does that mean to live 3 days in the space of 18 hours? Does that mean to work the whole 18 hours? Should I take like 3 little 2-hour naps and then a longer nap when that 18 hours is up? How does this increase my productivity in any way? The fact that people clap for this makes absolutely no sense to me.
Love, fun, business, money, whatever you want.
It's dumb advice, and it doesn't seem immediately harmful, but let's not forget that this dude has sold more than 1 million copies of his books. Someone is absorbing this and trying to incorporate it into their life.
If you watch Ed's shorter form content like this, some of it is pretty darn revealing. He has this YouTube short about the power of emotion on Zoom calls and presentations.
They forget that influence is about what people are feeling. They don't respond to what they hear or see, a little bit, but mainly they respond to what they feel.
I think Ed is right that people mostly respond to how they feel about information than to the information itself. But what he goes on to say next struck us as odd.
The highest energy wins and the most certain energy wins.
The highest energy wins and the most certain energy wins. So even if what you're saying is bunk, or if you're not 100% certain about something, if you're really jazzed about something and you try to make it sound like you're 100% certain, like advice or a path to success, your energy will win, and that creates influence. Or this short where he's speaking live, saying that McDonald's is successful as the biggest food seller and biggest real estate holder in the world because they're in the happiness business. And he drops this line.
See, your ability to take an inanimate object and link it to happiness and love will be your separator.
So the best advice is just advice that affects your emotions the most, regardless of its actual effectiveness in the world. And in business, success has nothing to do with the quality of the product. It's about linking your product to happiness. You're telling on yourself here, Ed. Keep those 2 pieces of advice in mind for later.
Perhaps Ed's signature concept is the power of one more. He says that in high school, if his team was running laps around the track, he would do one more after everyone else had stopped. If they were running a drill, he would do one more after everyone else had stopped. Not terrible advice, honestly. Ed made the one more philosophy the focus of his book, The Power of One More, The Ultimate Guide to Happiness and Success. The one more mindset is important to remember because it's key for the Arete Syndicate. Ed's also a very successful businessman, like Andy, but instead of supplements, Ed devoted his time to finance, where he worked in the World Financial Group to become a millionaire. Ed does seem a little bit more above board and a whole lot more palatable as a human being than Andy, but I still don't want to go overboard on how much more normal he is and give him too much credit because he's still a founder and key player in the real scam here, the Arete Syndicate.
The Arete Syndicate is a business group which claims to give you valuable coaching that you can then apply to your business in order to make a lot of money and, in their terms, achieve personal excellence in all areas of your life. For a monthly fee, and oh, will we get to the monthly fee in a bit, they say that you get access to coaching and monthly calls with Andy Frisella and Ed Milet. Now, I'm not going to disparage anybody for wanting to better themselves. Find a community with common goals and values that they can go to for advice or for accountability, which is really what the Arete Syndicate says they are selling. But those things aren't the problem. The problem is with the specifics. The introductory video on their website tells you a lot, so let's dive into that. They do a lot of implying in this stirring video, thin connection of two ideas, and then letting you fill in the rest by association. So let's talk about what they're selling, and then see if we can figure out what they're really selling.
They define this term arete as the Greek idea of excellence, and claim that all heroes of Greek myth were great examples of the quality of arete.
Arete. What is arete? Arete is a Greek word that originated from the name of Ares, but generally the word arete means excellence. In the ancient writings of the Greeks, the heroes are always people of arete.
But they're doing a lot under the surface when they claim this. First, they're dovetailing two things together: characters of Greek mythology, specifically Achilles and Odysseus, and Greek prosperity and dominance in the ancient world. Ed and Andy's voiceover talks about them in the context of just the ancient writings of the Greeks, and I'm truly left wondering if they're trying to imply that Achilles and Odysseus were real people. Their language does seem to imply that the Greeks were a dominant society specifically because of characters like Achilles and Odysseus, or at least the qualities they represented. And it sort of feels like a future civilization claiming that America was a global superpower because of the qualities represented by Superman and Captain America.
I would argue, however, that neither of them have ever picked up the Iliad, because their understanding of the Achaeans seems much more akin to Frank Miller's 300. These two societies are conflated when Athenians and Spartans had differing approaches to masculinity, to sexuality, and to gender. Spartans were pretty disinterested in commerce, unlike Ed and Andy, and prioritized the collective over any individual. As far as the actual ancient poems they reference, it's really difficult to admire almost anyone in the Homeric epics. They're all hotheads who steal each other's wives.
Achilles, the greatest warrior to ever live, is an absolute machine in battle. Physically, he's superior to everyone. He possesses the greatest arete.
Achilles is brave and strong, but is legendarily arrogant and cold to basically everyone. He cries frequently. He complains to his mom. Homer never explicitly says that Achilles and Patroclus are lovers, but just about every other classical thinker did. It's a really far cry from "this is Sparta" and really ends up feeling like this gas station imitation sushi version of history.
Ed and Andy follow the term arete through to the ancient Romans, who they claim were an even greater society because they took the idea of arete and made it better.
The Romans.
The Romans made it their goal to conquer the entire world, and they almost did it. One major reason for that is they took the idea, the Greek word of arete, and made it better.
Yeah, we're sure that had nothing to do with the expansion of government, standardization of currency, the building of roads, sewers, and aqueducts, etc. They mention the hero Aeneas from the epic poem, the Aeneid, and say that he was faithful to his nation in addition to being strong and smart, And then they straight up say, that is how the Romans took Arete to the next level.
The hero is Aeneas, and he has one main quality. He is 1000% faithful and committed, not to himself, but to his nation.
That's how the Romans took Arete to the next level.
This is about the point in the video where my alarm bells really started going off, because all of this is so incredibly fashy.
It could be argued that there was another ancient civilization that was even more impressive. Arete wasn't just becoming physically dominant. It wasn't just being a master thinker and communicator and influencer and leader. You see, there are groups and movements who exercise tremendous power and influence in the world, but they aren't making the world a better place.
I mean, it's pretty much great man theory. Great man theory is this approach to history which focuses on the impact of so-called great men, who are unique and superior in courage and intelligence and effective leaders. But this video is also more than that. Attributing the success of ancient civilizations to strong men dedicated to their nation is pretty darn fascist. And I'm not saying that they're fascist. Well, actually, I'm not saying Ed's a fascist. Andy made it pretty clear where he stands there. But they're using the same tactics that fascists use, implying that there is a through line of greatness throughout history that was once possessed by the strongest, greatest men that can be reclaimed by you, is a tactic that pretty much all modern fascists use. Also, 300 is a pretty on-the-nose movie to use footage in their video, because that's one of the most fascist movies I can think of. An ancient civilization that suspends its government to put its fate in the hands of one manly strongman to stave off an invasion of darker-skinned, sorta queer foreigners to protect their wives and families? Big Joel explains it better.
You can also totally tell what demographic they're targeting in this video with the footage they use of Brad Pitt in the 2004 film Troy, and loads of shots of the Spartans from 2007's 300. They're just so clearly, obviously tugging at the heartstrings of men approaching middle age by using manly man movies from 15 to 20 years ago. They say to do everything in a dominating fashion, just like every domineering football dad yelling at a referee has ever wanted to do.
They make perhaps their greatest implication at the end of this little pseudo-historical section of the video, in which they say that Roman global dominance was attributed to Arete, becoming physically dominant, a master thinker and communicator, influencer, and leader, as well as becoming part of something. And then they say, is this what Arete is about? Well, it might have been for the Greeks, and it also might have been for the Romans, but not us.
So is that it? Is that what Arete is all about? Well, it might have been for the Greeks, and it also might have been for the Romans.
But not us.
For them, it's about making a lot of money. And if you're the kind of person who is impressed by shots of people with nice watches, walking towards planes on tarmacs, and oh baby, you're gonna love this part, they start hitting you with shots of Dwayne Johnson on a private plane. The Rock looks like he's doing important business and signing documents. As far as we can tell, Dwayne Johnson has absolutely no connection to these grifters. They're just using footage of him because he's big and successful and cool, I guess.
Andy and Ed both reject the guru label, kind of like how Tony Robbins does.
We also created it because the entrepreneur space is filled with counterfeit business experts and con artist success gurus,
while also embodying it so completely. Their language heavily implies success if you follow their advice, but they mask it with a lot of talk about how it's not a get-rich-quick scheme kind of thing. Listen, we get it, the website says. The gurus are wrong. It's not easy. But it's also not impossible. I mean, as many times as the terms of service say there's no guarantee for success, their intro video also says the opportunity to be part of such a group has literally been worth millions of dollars to our members.
The opportunity to be part of such a network has literally been worth millions of dollars to current members.
So, our program doesn't guarantee success, but it sure does help it appear. Because really, this comes down to money. Andy and Ed are qualified to teach you this because they've been successful in business. And therefore, they're more successful in life. Because once again, they're richer than you. And that makes them better than you.
And they totally fulfill the requirement of making it seem like you're going to miss out of a lifelong benefit if you don't act right away. On their enrollment page, it gets like uncomfortably cloying. In the top, in big yellow letters, "Space is extremely limited," followed by, "Yeah, we know, everyone says that, and it's usually total BS, but here's the thing," and then they lay the pressure on hard. "If you sit on it and wait, you'll miss your opportunity altogether, and you'll have to wait until next time to apply. Are you ready to become part of the group that will change the landscape of the business world as we know it?" Not the group that has changed it or is changing it, but just some promise that the group will change the business world at some point, so their advice must be like, really good, right?
So, how much is this advice worth to you? Well, it better be a lot, because the Arete Syndicate is not cheap. It's also very opaque as to what you're buying and how much you have to pay. Arete has 2 plans available for members that are listed on their website. One charges $397 a month, and the other one is $4,699 a year. Well, Andy and Ed, your advice better be worth millions, because you're charging nearly $5,000 a year to get it from you. For the monthly price point, you get 3 live calls each month for members only, which, based on the terms of service, sounds like you sit in on a Zoom call. The Arete terms of service are very clear that joining Arete does not grant you access to Andy and Ed personally.
Because we want the Syndicate to be a true family, we even welcome members into our own homes.
And does not constitute a coaching relationship.
Into our own homes.
So I'm guessing this is just a webinar with maybe a Q&A section. Apparently, in 1 month, it's 1 call with Andy, 1 with Ed, and 1 with both. You get access to a members-only community and discounts on Arete events. So you get access to something akin to a Facebook group and are essentially paying $132 per video call to learn how to make good decisions with money.
For the price point that's almost $5,000 a year, you get to replay every Arete call and extended replay access of every Arete call, whatever that means. Additionally, you'd think that there would be like a big discount, like 10% off for forking all that money over at once, but it's just $65? That's like a 2% discount. I don't know. It seems small potatoes in comparison to the rest of the scheme. That just seems comically low to me.
But you know what the worst part is? If you're paying them $400 a month, you're not even technically in the Arete Syndicate. According to this Mike guy who's been vlogging his Arete experience, there's only about 70 people actually in the Arete Syndicate, and the rest are in an accelerator program. But he's totally okay with that, because his perception is that the actual Arete Syndicate has some of the most influential people in the world. According to some sources, actually being in the Arete Syndicate is free. However, one thing that Mike doesn't mention is that it's apparently $50,000 to join an accelerator group. $50,000! And you're not even really in the club.
But your monthly Arete price is only one way to give them your money. Arete also has weekend conferences that you can attend. As we were writing this, the one in Nashville in November 2020 happened. Ticket prices were $600 for 1 ticket, or $800 for 2, encouraging you to bring a friend on board for a huge discount. Not to mention the $15,000 VIP ticket, which includes the incredible perks of preferred seating, a swag bag, and the chance to spend time with Andy and Ed at a private event.
Into our own homes.
Which still sounds dubious, because your application does say, once again, that you understand that it is not possible to speak with Andy and Ed directly at these Arete events. So do you, like, sit at a table in a hotel ballroom that the fellas do a quick drive-by to your table and say hi? I just can't imagine any way that this is actually worth $15,000.
If the Arete website is to be believed, and let's be real, it probably isn't, they had 30,000 applicants last year. They say a little more than 2,400 applicants were approved, but they only had space for less than half of that. So if 1,200 people were paying $4,700 to Andy and Ed, that was about $5.5 million a year for what amounts to talking your way through 2 or 3 Zoom calls every month.
So they're making money off huge membership fees, enormous live event ticket prices, and that's all before the merch sales, which have to be insane. There are several blogs that we found where dudes are just eating this shit up and decking themselves out in Arete merch. Every video or blogger who's attended the conference has the Arete shirt, the lanyard, the hat, the bag. They're just completely head over heels for it.
And people are eating this shit up. The Sigma Grindset crowd, and you can totally tell who that is because they have signs like Young Hustler in their videos. They have tons of videos where they're decked out in merch preaching the gospel of Arete. One of these guys has a long blog post detailing his convention experience and ends the blog condescendingly looking around a late night flight home, saying that everybody else was sleeping while he and his friend were reviewing notes from the event. Therefore, he's working harder than all those other people? How dare they sleep on a late night flight? How will you ever become a billionaire CEO when you're sleeping at nighttime? Maybe they should have been figuring out those 6-hour days that Ed was talking about. I don't know.
We thought this guy's blog was hilarious because he's just so elated at the conference. One speaker yells, "I hate Trump." And I quote, "I love what he said next," which was that he doesn't actually hate Trump and that he believes that entrepreneurs create their own economy. Hell yes. Now, we're not business types, but the dude's description of the conference just seems like this motivational soup to us. They give advice like words plus sounds plus visuals plus environment plus association plus trust being the secret sauce for success. And it just sounds made up. Like half of it boils down to be positive, work hard.
None of that really matters though, because business is not what the Arete Syndicate is about. It's not about personal growth or excellence. It's really about this picture of Ben Shapiro holding a piece of wood.
There's a really clear disconnect between what Ed and Andy say they're selling and what they're actually selling. It's a cult. I mean, I'm kind of joking about that, but not really. The whole thing's a scam. It's a cult of masculinity, selling confidence to future confidence men. It's really like a cocktail of a bunch of bad personal philosophies.
I mean, first, we already talked about great man theory. Andy and Ed are peddling the idea that the most successful societies in history were that way because there were men who were great and strived for personal excellence. And great man theory is a crock. It's a very 19th century way of looking at the world. This isn't all to say that a person can't achieve greatness or that you can't influence others in a positive way. It's just a misguided, far too individualistic way of looking at societies. It pushes the idea that we've all just got to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and if we could do that, we create a great society. It ignores systemic problems that hold people back, like unfair wages, single parenthood, lack of health care, and far more issues that invade our lives.
It's also just easily recognizable toxic masculinity. For as much as Andy and Ed talk about making a positive impact with your business, they seem to be far more concerned with just dominating everyone and everything, winning, asserting yourself to be the manliest man in the room. If you listen actively at all, you can see they put everything into this fashy language. In terms of war, they're looking for tactical people and people ready to dominate. Everything is a battle, and they revere ancient societies that they see as winners because they're militaries. I mean, the Order of Man group, that's like a smaller version of the Arete Syndicate, literally sells leather day planners that call battle planners. Nearly all of the speakers at the November 2022 Arete Live event fall into two categories: business people and sports stars. They clearly love hierarchies and they want men on top of them.
Outside of the stuff that they frame in terms of combat or battle, everything is made to sound like it's from a video game or something. They call a business group a syndicate, which is not a word I usually hear out of Assassin's Creed. The Order of Man podcast has a group called the Iron Council. I just think it's so funny because that sounds like something an 11-year-old who just discovered Skyrim would think sounded really cool. And it's hard to imagine a grown man calling his very serious manly man group that.
Their worldview is clearly tailored to a fundamentally conservative, Christian, white, evangelical demographic. The world is the way it is because of strong men. Women can just kind of go over there. They don't matter too much, and their place is clearly not as the movers and the shakers in society. It's at times explicitly Christian, like with Ed's podcast, but that comes across as more of a Christian nationalist thing and a worldview thing than actually trying to live like Yeshua. Jesus is probably way too socialist for him. It reminds us a lot of a book we read last year called Jesus and John Wayne, which chronicles how in the last 75 years, evangelicals have worked to replace the Jesus of the Gospels with this idol of rugged masculinity and Christian nationalism, or in the words of one modern chaplain, with a spiritual badass. The best thing you could ever be in the Arete Syndicate would be the Andrew Tate model of a guy. Big muscles, a beard, smoking cigars on your expensive car, your jet. It's an image, but one that doesn't exist in the real world. It's an image of a toxic masculinity cartoon.
But most of all, what Andy and Ed are selling is the prosperity gospel for the Sigma grind set group. It's the secret for the supplements set. Prosperity gospel is the uniquely American branch of Christian fundamentalism whose core tenet is that good things happen to good people, that God rewards the faithful with money and influence. So if you're rich, it's because you're good. You deserve your money. This is absolutely no different. If you don't make it, it's because you weren't strong enough. You didn't embody the ideals of Arete enough. Andy and Ed clearly think that they're good people with how much they talk about a positive impact they've made and tacitly comparing themselves to Gandhi. In this way of thinking, they're successful because they're good, and they're good because they're successful.
Dan Olson, one of our favorite YouTubers, has a great video on his channel, Folding Ideas, about the scam that the Mickelson twins run, and he lays out how coaching and advice that cost people money are a great way to con people. He says that advice costs nothing to manufacture and can only be evaluated in hindsight. So this may be the most clever part of Andy and Ed's grift. It's where Andy and Ed are shielded from criticism through Ed's attitude of one more. If you didn't make it, the problem wasn't their advice. Clearly, they made it, so the problem is you. You should have worked harder. You should have done one more.
Wait, actually no, we're not done yet. This shit is a lie. It's all a lie. They don't want to make a positive impact, they just want to make as much money as possible. Literally in the terms of service for applying for the Arete Syndicate, it has a warning about adult language/content and says that certain people hear a bad word and it triggers them and offends them so much that it clouds them from being able to absorb a valuable lesson that's being taught. Clients who are uncomfortable with such topics and language should not enroll in the program. Several blogs that we read had speakers saying that you should be polemic and divide people instantaneously through provocation, and that totally goes with Andy's placement of himself as this truth teller that the world just can't fucking handle, man. The message is the problem, not the swear words.
Look, these guys suck. They're taking money out of the pockets of vulnerable people in order to line their own and inflate their egos by making it sound like everything they have to say is just absolutely golden. There's nothing special about them. They're just rich. They might even be good businessmen, but there's nothing about life that they know that's better or more worthwhile than what you and I know. They're the personification that strong men create good times meme that Elon Musk likes. They're lying to you that all you need is some hard work and there's nothing you cannot manifest, flattening the world and life as to be about men's physical strength and their ability to dominate others. What they're doing is not helpful, and they're taking advantage of a lot of young men.
Guys like Andy and Ed are snake oil salesmen. They're peddling a false cure to a very real problem. But what is that problem? Well, it's hard to get your arms around, because there's clearly a crisis facing guys. David Brooks wrote an excellent op-ed in the New York Times recently called The Crisis of Men and Boys, in which he lays out some seemingly insurmountable problems for men. Boys are lagging behind girls in school from kindergarten through college. They're less prepared to start school when they're young and have worse GPAs on average throughout their years there. Men are struggling at work. Almost a third of high school educated men are out of work, especially if you're 25 to 34, which is within Andy and Ed's seeming target demographic. They're making less than their dads did. Men are struggling physically and mentally and account for about 75% of deaths of despair, which involves suicide and drug overdoses. This squares anecdotally with what we've seen in high school-aged boys in our classrooms. I once had a girl tell me that there was enormous pressure on her to succeed academically because, and I quote, "Everyone knows the boys in our neighborhood aren't going anywhere."
Brooks says that men report being less ambitious than women, that it is not that men have fewer opportunities, it's that men are not taking them. Similarly, roughly 15% of men say that they have no close friends. Wives are twice as likely to initiate divorce as husbands, which Brooks attributes to faults in men. David Brooks says, "I come away with the impression that many men are like what Dean Acheson said about Britain after World War II. They've lost an empire, but have not yet found a role. Many men have an obsolete ideal that being a man means being the main breadwinner in your family. Then they can't meet that ideal. Demoralization follows." That might be right. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a sociologist. If anyone has one clear solution to this problem, they're much more qualified than we are. But it sure does seem like we've promised young men, and especially white men, that if you're physically strong and handsome and not a complete idiot, that you will succeed. That the world has promised them a lot, yet not prepared them for real-life scenarios, like succeeding academically because you learned how to write a good paper, or division of household labor in a marriage, or how to maintain close friendships.
Ryan Mickler, who runs the Iron Council and writes books much in the same vein as the Arete Syndicate, has a book called Sovereignty, The Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Men. The description of the book says, "Every man is born with just one thing, his sovereignty, his power to respond to his environment and his circumstances. Unfortunately, most men have spent their lives giving away that sovereignty. Every time a man passes blame or shirks his responsibility, every time he makes excuses for his performance, and every time he trades his unlimited potential for a little perceived safety and security, he willingly submits himself to the mercy of others. Is it any wonder that men in general seem to have lost their way? Take one sobering statistic, the rate of suicide in men, and you begin to see how damaging the effects of the voluntary subjugation of men to their families, their businesses, and their governments can be."
So we actually agree about what the problem is, that men are feeling lost, and they, as well as their families, are paying the price for it. But we completely disagree on the solution. The book teaser goes on to say that men have always been expected to protect, provide, and preside over themselves, their families, their businesses, and their communities. By embodying the 13 sovereign virtues we detail inside, every man will become more capable of fulfilling his masculine duties and responsibilities. So it seems like Ryan's solution is just to lean into it, the protector, the provider, the presider, the businessman, the head of the family. And if you don't fit those labels, you have failed as a man. But what if you don't fit in there, or don't want to fit in there? What if you're gay, or disabled, or short? What if you have no taste for business, or you like working with kids as a job, or you're into, I don't know, gardening? If you don't fit society's idea of what it means to be a man, the solution is just to get back in the box and shut up. We're always left wondering that if those roles don't work for you, do you guys like Andy, Ed, and Ryan think you're a lost cause? Do they think that you'd genuinely be happier if you could just suck it up and be their idea of a man?
Just to be clear here, We're not saying masculinity is bad. Jake and I are both straight white men. Worse, we're straight white men with a YouTube channel. It's almost as bad as a podcast. We both love baseball and Clint Eastwood movies and AC/DC. It's not that promoting masculinity is a bad thing. It's the advocating that hyper-masculine dominance is the only good way to be. We're also not saints. We've struggled to articulate our feelings for large chunks of our lives. We've had issues where we needed to be reminded to vacuum rather than just remembering to do it because we've received many of the same messages from society in our lives that puts more household management on women than on men.
It just doesn't seem like the solution to our crisis of masculinity in this era is more masculinity. It doesn't seem like you can just bench press and beer chug and beard grow and be a man to fix this problem. Thinking about our own struggles of finding a positive masculinity, the things that have made our lives better is when we've learned to put our own wants to the side or to listen better and to become more empathetic people. It seems to us that it would be worth trying to focus on instilling kindness and understanding and patience in boys from a young age. Teaching them that when you lose sometimes, which is a fact of life that you cannot escape, that's okay. That offering dignity to someone is more important than dominating them. That their feelings aren't the enemy and that expressing them isn't a weakness. That compassion isn't a weakness. The goal of guys like Andy and Ed and this Ryan Mickler dude seem to show you how to get back on top of that pile of masculinity. But wouldn't it be more worthwhile to expand the lens of what masculinity could be?
That sounds like a really tall order, though. That sounds like something that would take a large-scale generational change and is something that we, with our little YouTube channel, have no power over. And you know what they say, if you can't beat 'em.
Are you ready to achieve your ultimate happiness? Are you tired of being thought of as less than the ideal man? You need to get battle ready. You need a Rewire Conglomerate. Who are we? We're Jake and Dan. We're extremely rich and successful, at least as far as you know. We started a YouTube channel from the ground up with just one subscriber. Now, we've multiplied that by literally more than 1,000 times. That means we're qualified to give you life advice. You can tell we're trustworthy because we're crossing our arms and have signifiers of traditional masculinity. We've got flannel shirts, beards, and tattoos. Wow! It doesn't matter that we're only like 5'6".
Who told you? No, who told you we're only 5'6"? Because we only shoot the videos from like waist up, so someone had to tell you.
Act now to join the Rewire Conglomerate. Yes, every group says its space is limited, and it's usually total BS. But you're gonna have to take our word for it that it's different with us. Don't bother reading the terms of service that shield us from accountability. Just listen to us heavily imply that you'll be successful if you follow our method. What is that method? Well, I can't say it until you join. It might be a lot of money to join, but just remember, our advice is worth its weight in